Okay, so today we're going to talk about avian mating and social behavior. Primarily, what we're looking at here are mating systems. So, mating systems are just ways of describing the relative proportion of copulation opportunities for males and females within a population and how strong males and females are socially bonded in these different populations. These different systems are thought, or they evolutionarily should, impart some fitness advantage to the males and females within that population, though not always. It's not always equivalent. Females or males may get more out of it depending on the system. In general, we're talking about monogamy and polygamy, having one mate or having a whole bunch of mates. These things can further be subdivided a number of ways. So, monogamous species can either be genetically monogamous or socially monogamous. And polygamous species can either be polygynous or polyandrous. So uh, there's a bunch of different systems here. Within each of these systems, there are different hypotheses or different um, examples that we'll look at that sort of describe what might be driving that particular system to be the preferred system of that species. So first we have genetic monogamy. So genetic monogamy is a quite rare system in birds. There are only a few examples of real genetic monogamy, but the idea here is males and females reproduce exclusively with each other within a pair bond. An example of this is a red crossbill. Um, Genetic studies on red crossbills in Norway have shown some indication that males and females stay together, pair bonded, and only reproduce with each other, at least within a given season. So that's genetic monogamy. Um, there are some other species that show within, at least within given seasons, some uh, genetic monogamy. Common loons, little auks, and Florida scrub jays, all mentioned in your book, are other species that show this. These are not necessarily past a single breeding season, though. So it doesn't. So genetic monogamy doesn't necessarily mean monogamous for life. It means within a breeding season, I'm going to mate with this one single uh, other individual. In some species, it can be multiple seasons. What is far more common, and in fact the most common breeding system in birds, or mating system in birds, is social monogamy, where a male and female pair up, but extra pair copulation occurs at varying rates. So this male and this female get together and they sort of have this agreement. Obviously, it's not a spoken agreement, but this agreement that they're going to work together to raise offspring. But that does not mean that this male or this female won't have sex with any other individuals in the population. It just means that they're going to help each other. They're going to stick together and work together and raise young together. Um, and so sometimes you have a little bit of uh, a little bit of extra pair copulation happening with the male or the female, and sometimes it can be eh, quite a lot, um, somewhere between like 10 to 50% of offspring in a nest might belong to another male, for example. It really depends on the species. Social monogamy raises, and monogamy in general actually, raises a really important question when you think about uh, evolution and the relative fitness created through breeding opportunities uh, across two different genders, across male and female individuals. because females lay the eggs, most of the time females are the one, they have a really high um, energy cost associated with reproduction, and they really have to put a lot of effort into making sure those individuals and the eggs that they lay are going to be raised and be healthy and be successful. A lot of their fitness is tied into that because a lot of their energy is tied into that. Males, their energy of required to copulate is relatively minimal, and then that's all they really have to have invested in the entire thing to have offspring, right? Like they can just have sex, leave, and let the female do all the work, and theoretically, by doing that, they could have sex with a lot of different females, and they would have a huge number of offspring, which would increase their genetic fitness. So why do males then bond and spend so much time with one female and significantly reduce their ability to have many, many, many offspring? Well, the thought is that there must be a fitness benefit to doing that, right? Um, so most likely it comes from the relative cost of competition with other males and trying to get to these different females, theoretically, uh, and the loss of successful breeding or successful brood rearing, I should say, um, by the female when the male doesn't help. So when the male's not present, breeding or brood production success is reduced. And so that probably drives social monogamy, where the male's like, I'm going to stay with this female and invest much more time here because I want to make sure that at least here I am successful in rearing offspring, and then I'm also going to spend a little bit of time with some other females and hope I can uh, maybe have a few more offspring somewhere else, and some other males probably going to be pair bonded with her, and that male's going to help raise those babies. Um, so that's kind of how we think of social monogamy as working. There are some different um, hypotheses, some different ideas about what drives social monogamy. And the first is what's called mate guarding monogamy. In mate guarding monogamy, um, the male behavior is a guarding behavior. So he defends the female from other males directly, typically by literally hanging out closer to her during her fertile period, which is in general 5 to 10 days before the first egg is laid through the majority of egg laying. So he just sticks with her that whole time, and any males that come around, he fights off. This guarantees that the males that or the offspring that the male is rearing, is helping to rear, are his offspring and not some other male's offspring. So that imparts a fitness benefit to him. And there are actually two forms of guarding. So the first one I described there, that's a physical form of guarding. I will fight you off if you come near my female. That's and male blue throats are an example of a bird that will do that. They'll stay much closer to the female during her fertile period and fight other males off that come near. The other, though, would be auditory. An auditory mate guarding behavior is one in which the males perch up on a territory and call on that territory. And of course, one of the functions of that is to tell other males in the area, this is my territory, back off. Um, this will reduce the likelihood of males entering the territory to try to mate with the female. But it's not perfect. So birds that do an auditory um, form of mate guarding still are going to have to occasionally physically um, guard the female if they want to ensure that the offspring they're rearing are their own offspring. Mate assistance monogamy, um, and this is a ringed plover, which is a good example of this. The idea here is the male helps the female directly by helping her rear the offspring. Um, and that by doing this, the number of offspring that are reared every breeding season will be higher than it would if the male isn't present. So if the male just left after reproducing, there would be less offspring produced. And so it is to the male's benefit to stay because it has more total number of babies. Its fitness is higher. And so this ringed plover is a great example. They show biparental care, and they do this, and they don't have any recognizable mate guarding behavior. The male just helps the female, and the female uh, helps the male. Right? They help each other to raise the young. Um, and by doing this, they have more offspring than they do if a male isn't present. What's really interesting in this particular ring plover example is that there's also extremely rare extra pair copulation. It's kind of an idealized representation of this kind of relationship where they just kind of have faith in each other. The male does his part, the female does her part. They're both trying to work together to raise these young, and um, they don't have sex with other individuals. That's the whole of it right there. Some other examples in European starlings. Uh, when there was an experiment done where males were taken from nests and compared with nests where males were left there to help the female. And what the results of that study found is that when males are present and they're helping to sit on eggs, they actually keep the average temperature of the nest a little bit higher, and that allows the young to develop more quickly, and that imparts a fitness benefit to those young, uh, well, to the male and female, and then a health benefit to the young. Uh, and so that's another example where if you take the males out, the overall success of the young is a little bit less, and so the mate assistance from the male was very important in that system. Uh, very similarly, um, snow buntings have another very similar experiment where mates males were removed from the system, and in this particular system, males bring food uh, to their mates, and when males were removed, they weren't doing that. Females reared less offspring as a result. So this is mate assistance monogamy. Female enforced monogamy is where males are associated with a female that actually can prevent the male from seeking other mates. An example of this is the ground tit from China. So that's what this bird you're looking at here is. Um, Here, once a female is paired with a male, she will become extremely aggressive to any other females entering a territory. This is really interesting because it even happens outside of the breeding season. Like once she's got her man, um, she is not letting other females around him. She will attack the other females aggressively. And by doing this outside of the breeding season, she ensures long term pairing, right? Not just pairing for a breeding season, but she ensures that that male's pretty well locked down and it's her man forever. Um, in house wrens, females will actually if they know that their partner has slept with another, I don't like the word slept with, is ridiculous. Of putting like human terms in avian reproductive biology. I'm sorry. Uh, if the male has copulated with a different female, the paired female will go to that female's nest and destroy all of her eggs. She ensuring that that male will stop doing that, because if the male keeps doing that and the eggs keep dying, he's just wasting energy trying to have more offspring that will never come uh, to fruition because they get killed by the paired female. So that's a really interesting strategy for females trying to uh, essentially enforce a monogamy on males. The next, so that's genetic and social monogamy. The next um, system we're going to look at are the polygamous systems, polyandry and polygyny. In polyandry, females accept sperm from more than one male in a given breeding season. In other words, females have multiple mates. The first one of these is almost confusing. Male enforced polyandry. You're like, how could a male enforce females having more than one mate? Well, the way that happens is through uh, forced reproduction, um, where basically females, there are multiple aggressive males that mate with the same female. And so, if we look at this is a stitch bird. If we look at the stitch bird, if you look at this diagram on the left, this comes from a paper on stitch bird reproductive strategies. You can see in A is a typical passerine breeding position, typical avian breeding position. Uh, receptive here, down here, a receptive female on the bottom and the male on top. He leans in and the cloacal protuberance links up with the cloaca. He ejaculates, and it's all a rather quick event altogether. The other three figures here, um, so B, C, and D, are showing the other approach that stitch birds in particular use in reproduction. You see that it is, and forgive this language, I don't know a better way of really saying this. It's basically missionary position reproduction in a bird. Right, they're facing each other. You can see quite clearly in figure D over here. What happens is males will fly into already pair bonded female nests, and they have adapted this behavior um, to they face off the female so she can't leave the nest. They're kind of blocking the nest entrance and they're facing her, and they push her down onto her back and mate with her, and she can't get away. And in that way, you have um, females having multiple male partners, but that is being forced onto them. So that is the stitch bird and male enforced polyandry. Convenience polyandry, there's a bit of overlap here between male enforced polyandry and convenience polyandry. So let me explain this, and then I'll explain why it's different. Females here will mate with more than one male because the cost of rejecting secondary suitors is too high. So an example of this would be in mallards. Mallards, much like stitch birds, are sexually aggressive. The males are super sexually aggressive, and they will have gang sexual activities where many males will chase a female and try to mate with her. And they are extremely aggressive in this behavior. It is in the female's best personal interest to allow that to happen typically. The reason for that, so far this is kind of like the stitch bird, right? It's aggressive males creating multiple male partners for a single female through this aggressive behavior. It is like the stitch bird, but the difference is here there's a if the female is unwilling to eventually give up and allow the males to mate with her, she has a high probability of dying. They'll literally drown the female in the process of trying to mate with her. So the cost is far too high. She's probably not going to get away. The males are tenacious, and so it's either she accepts the situation or she gets drowned. So it's in this case it's a step beyond the stitch bird, where if the female could get away, in the case of the stitch bird, she she's not going to die. Um, but in convenience polyandry, there's a cost associated with not taking on multiple male suitors. That's that's the difference. Material benefits polyandry. Here, females have multiple male partners because they secure some resource uh, that ultimately benefits her. This could be a literal resource such as a nuptial gift. So nuptial gifts are gifts that organisms give to, usually males give to females, as in exchange for reproduction. There's all sorts of nuptial gifts in birds, nuptial gifts in insects. Lots of animals give nuptial gifts. Um, it's well, I'm not going to go there. Uh, this is the Dunnock, and so this is an example uh, of real world material benefits polyandry. And so the Dunnock has two male sexual partners, and her strategy is very clever. She gives essentially very even sexual access to both males. So she has sex with this male, and then the next time she's receptive, she has sex with this male, and she goes back and forth and back and forth. And what that means is that both males have, as she's laying eggs, a really high probability that some of those eggs are their offspring, right? Well, I've had just as much opportunity to create offspring with her as he has. So probably some of these eggs have my babies in them. And what happens is she gets two males to help care for the nest instead of just one male to do that. And so in this case, the material benefit is assistance. She gets twice as many assistants with the nest. Fertility insurance polyandry, like in this is a great tit. This is from Europe and Asia. Um, this is where females will take on multiple partners to ensure that um, the quality of the sperm are high, essentially, to ensure that they actually get fertilized eggs. And so with the great tit, they do this, and in experiments where the uh, females were found to have mated with infertile males, they still laid fertilized eggs. And so what this tells you is that they weren't just mating with that male, but they were also mating with other males, and that ensured that their eggs were fertilized. Our last form of polyandry is genetic benefits polyandry. And this is where the female mates with multiple males to secure a greater diversity of genetic material that uh, should impart some genetic benefit uh, to her offspring. So it could be, for example, achieving high gene compatibility or greater heterozygosity in her offspring. So an example of this is the reed bunting. In reed buntings, older males have a more striking, strong, bold pattern. Um, and in those situations, that suggests a very strong male, one that has lived a long time relatively. And so that also then suggests that that male has really good genetics. And so in in those cases where females encounter these males, they may be accepted as extra pair partners um, much more readily than younger males might be because you're like, well, this is some really good genetics. Western bluebirds actually do a pretty similar thing, and I think that's covered in your book. All right, polygyny. So polygyny is just when uh, males gain sexual access to multiple females in a breeding season. It's just the opposite. And so deception-based polygyny is where males behave as though they were going to be monogamous with that female, but they're actually already paired off. Basically, they're deceiving a secondary mate so that they can have another mate. An example of this is the European pied flycatcher. He will set up a territory, reproduce with the first female, and then after that's done, we'll set up a second territory. It's kind of like having a home away from home, where you have a second territory set up with a second mate. But we'll spend far more time with the first mate than the second mate. It doesn't really do that. Contributes very, very minimally to the second mate. This is interesting because if you look at the literature for European pied flycatchers, um, you will see that there's a lot of disagreement about whether or not this is deception-based polygyny or if it's what's called genetic benefits polyandry. And so it's a really interesting discussion to have. But he does set up the second territory, and it is at least probable. It is likely to be deception-based polygyny, even if um, there is another take on this. So I would recommend that you go look at that literature. Uh, it's pretty interesting to read. All right. So next we have female defense polygyny. Female defense polygyny is where males set up a territory that multiple females will enter, and they defend all of those females within that territory so that they have uh, primary access to those females. Um, so this is taking territoriality to the next level. Um, Example of this is with the Montezuma or Pendola from Central America. That's what you see here. And so these guys have breeding colonies up in trees. And there will be, essentially in this circumstance, an alpha male. So the males will all fight over a given territory. One male will come out on top. That's the alpha male. And then all the other males sit within a sort of hierarchy below the alpha male. And the alpha male has primary access to all of the females in that breeding colony. Um, and as long as that male's in the colony, the alpha's in the colony, the other males have to stay on sort of the periphery. They can't come into the colony. They can't come near the females. Of course, that male has to go eat and do, normal life things. So at different times of the day, like in the middle of the day, the male will leave to go out into the forest. And then some of the lesser males within the hierarchy can come in, and they also do get some mating opportunity because the male literally cannot guard the territory 24/7. But as soon as the alpha male comes back, those males are pushed out again. When the lesser males come in, they defend the females as well. And the alpha male only leaves the nest when the least number of females are in the territory. So early in the morning and later in the day, when the most females are back at the breeding territory, the alpha male is always there because that's when most of the females are there. So it's only in the middle of the day, basically, when a lot of the females will leave out into the forest as well, that the male will leave, um, ensuring that he's around to have optimum number of potential mates. And so the alpha male gets about 77%, at least in one study, it was like 77.3% of the total number of copulation opportunities. Uh, and the lesser males get the remaining 20% or so. So being the alpha male is very, very good for your fitness in this case. Resource defense polygyny. This is when uh, males defend a territory. So this is very similar to what we just looked at. We were talking about territory and multiple females within the territory, but this goes beyond territory. And the idea here is that it's so in the previous example with the Orpandolas, we were talking about defense of the females. Here we're talking about resource availability within the territory. So males have set up a territory with really good resources. It could be nesting resources or food availability or something like that. And the red-winged blackbird is an example of a species that does this. Red-winged blackbirds, you'll see them nesting around marshes. And just like in this picture, around cattails a lot. Um, those marshes provide the nesting materials and food resources that um, females need. And so the male sets up a territory and defends that territory, and then gives access to those resources exclusively to his females, and may have several female mates within that territory as a result of defending that space. So the opportunities here arise because females want access to those resources, and it's that male that guards those resources. So that's resource defense polygyny, and then finally we have lek polygyny. So lek polygyny is when males, a bunch of males, sometimes it's not a bunch, but several males go out. These are typically the most dominant males in a population. They go out and they do some sort of display, or they create a little territory. There's some sort of display involved. An example of this is something like the greater sage grouse. A bunch of males, you can see them in this picture. What is that? There's 1, 2, 3, that might be one back there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 or 9 males in this picture. This is the lek, right? These are a bunch of the more dominant males out displaying. They're doing their breeding display, and then here in this picture you can see a single female. Certainly there are probably more females around than that, and probably more males for that matter. But that's what we have in the frame. And what happens here is that the males are doing this display, and the females choose the most attractive male from the bunch. And it could be that a single or just a couple males within the lek are the most attractive males, and almost all the females pick those handful of males as their breeding partner. And so it's female choice, but the male gets multiple female mates, so it is a form of polygyny. All right. For your discussion post this week, you need to choose any bird that was not covered in this lecture or in the chapter material, of which there's already a bit of overlap. And you need to describe its mating systems and its behaviors associated with that mating system. One way to approach this is you might want to take a mating system first approach. In other words, which mating system am I interested in? And then go and find a bird that does that particular mating system. You don't have to do it that way. You can just pick your favorite bird and um, go with that. That's fine. Either way, you want to read about the breeding behaviors um, and pair bonding behaviors, etc., of the bird, and then apply the appropriate system to the bird. So you'll write about those behaviors in that mating system in that particular species, and then your responses should just be comparisons between your bird and the author you're responding to. So that's your discussion for this week. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me.